We all want to get to the heart of things right. To really understand a topic without drowning in a sea of information. And that's precisely what we're doing today, diving deep into something that's absolutely fundamental to how we think about ourselves and how we learn.
Intelligence.
Exactly.
We're going to be looking at a fascinating collection of articles all about intelligence from the Educational Psychology Review, published back in 2000.
Now, 2000, that's going back a bit, isn't it? I mean, are those ideas even relevant today?
Oh, that's what's so interesting about this collection, you know? It gives us this snapshot of how experts were thinking about intelligence at what was a really pivotal time. And by looking back, we can actually see which of those ideas have stood the test of time and which ones have maybe evolved or even been challenged in the years since.
I like that. So it's not just about revisiting the past, it's about understanding how we got to where we are today.
Exactly. And our goal in this deep dive is to extract the most enduring insights from this research and see how it connects to educational practices even now.
So think of this as your fast-track guide to getting up to speed on the key perspectives about intelligence and its role in education.
That's a great way to put it. And these articles, they really cover a huge range of perspectives,
Oh, yeah.
from really foundational research to practical applications in the classroom. I mean, we're talking the big questions here, you know.
Yeah.
What are the latest and greatest findings in intelligence research? Is intelligence even a useful concept for educators anymore? And how do all those standardized tests, those IQ tests we hear so much about, how do they relate to actual performance in school?
Those are some big questions.
They are. And then there's the question of how intelligence plays a role in understanding individual differences. You know, why some students struggle while others excel.
Right. So is it all about nature? Is it all about nurture? Or is it some complex mix of the two?
Exactly. And at the very core of all of this is that age-old question, what is intelligence anyway?
It feels like something we all talk about, but maybe don't fully understand.
Right. And then there's the really exciting question, can we actually modify intelligence in ways that can really benefit learning?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. A lot of different angles to consider.
Absolutely. But don't worry, we've done the heavy lifting for you. We've gone through all these articles and synthesized the most important takeaways so you can get right to the heart of the matter.
Awesome. So let's dive in. And one of the first things that really jumped out at me when I was looking at these articles is that in psychology, where theories often come and go, the concept of intelligence has really stuck around.
It's true. You know, one of the contributors to this collection, Elena Grigorenko, she points out that many psychological concepts, they kind of have their moment in the spotlight and then they sort of fade away. But intelligence, it's different. It's had this, she calls it an amazingly consistent presence in the field.
That's fascinating. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it speaks to just how fundamental cognitive abilities are to pretty much everything we do. You know, how we think, how we solve problems, how we learn.
It's kind of the engine behind everything else.
In a way, it is. And, you know, even going back to the very early days of psychology, you have figures like Francis Galton, who was really interested in whether smartness was something that ran in families.
I remember learning about him in my intro psych class. It seems so basic, though, you know, just looking at family trees and trying to track intelligence.
It was a very rudimentary approach, for sure, and it definitely had its limitations. But the key insight from Galton's work was that it really set the stage for this enduring debate about the relative roles of nature and nurture in intelligence.
A debate that's still raging today.
Absolutely. And then you have Alfred Binet, whose work really brought the concept of intelligence into the world of education.
Ah, Binet, he's the one behind the first IQ tests, right?
He is. And his work was absolutely pivotal because it gave educators a really practical way to think about and measure intellectual abilities in students.
So before Binet, intelligence was this kind of abstract idea.
Right, it was more theoretical. But the Nay's tests, they made it measurable. They gave it a number.
So his work really helped solidify this connection between psychological theory and actual educational practice.
Absolutely. The development of those early intelligence tests, it provided a tool for identifying students who might need extra support or those who might be particularly gifted.
So it's interesting how even as psychology has become so much more complex and nuanced, this core concept of intelligence, it's remained this constant point of inquiry.
It has. And within this collection of articles, there's a paper by John Mayer and Casey Cobb that delves into a particularly fascinating area of intelligence research.
Okay, tell me more.
Emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence. That's a term you hear everywhere these days.
It is, and back in 2000 when this article was published, it was already starting to gain a lot of traction. So Mayer and Cobb, they really laid out the groundwork for understanding what emotional intelligence is and how it relates to education.
So how do they define emotional intelligence? What are the key components?
They defined it as the ability to accurately perceive emotions in oneself and in others, to understand emotional information, to manage and regulate one's own emotions, and to use emotions to facilitate thought.
So it's not just about being in touch with your feelings. It's about understanding how those feelings work and how they influence your thinking and your actions.
Exactly. And they were particularly interested in how emotional intelligence might impact learning and education.
I could see why that would be of interest to educators. I mean, if you can teach kids to manage their emotions, wouldn't that create a better learning environment?
That's the idea. And Mayer and Cobb, they raised some really key questions in their paper.
Like what?
Well, first they wanted to know, is there enough scientific evidence to really support the idea that emotional intelligence is linked to improved learning outcomes? Does it actually make a difference?
That's a really important question. You don't want to just jump on a bandwagon without solid evidence.
Right. And then they asked, should schools be actively implementing policies to raise emotional intelligence in students? I mean, if it does have an impact on learning, should we be making it a priority?
Interesting.
And finally, they wanted to know what research and what psychological theories could provide a solid foundation for such policies. What's the scientific basis for all of this?
So it's about taking this popular idea of emotional intelligence and really grounding it in rigorous research.
Exactly. And one of the key points that Mayer and Cobb highlighted was this widespread belief that emotional intelligence is largely learned rather than being something you're just born with.
So it's not just in your genes.
Right. And this is a big reason why educators are so interested in emotional intelligence. Because if you believe something can be taught and developed, you're naturally going to be more inclined to try and cultivate it in an educational setting.
It makes sense.
Oh,
If it's learnable, it's teachable.
precisely. And that leads us to the work of Stephen Pittrell and Bessie Wilkerson, who really dove into the complex interplay of nature and nurture in shaping both intelligence and academic achievement.
Okay, so we're moving from emotional intelligence back to more traditional cognitive intelligence.
Here we are. And Pittrell and Wilkerson, they were specifically looking at how both genetic factors and environmental factors contribute to those scores we see on standardized intelligence tests like IQ tests, as well as overall academic achievement.
It's nature versus nurture, the age-old debate.
Right. But what they found is that it's not a simple either situation. It's much more nuanced than that.
So both genes and environment play a role, but maybe in different ways or to different extent?
Exactly. They found that both nature and nurture, both genes and environment, are significant, and they're interconnected in really complex ways.
I seem to remember that they also emphasize that these influences aren't the same across all aspects of intelligence or academic performance.
You've got a good memory. It's absolutely right. They found that the relative impact of genes and environment, it's not uniform. It varies depending on what specific cognitive skill you're looking at.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. So, for example, the influence of genetics might be stronger for, say, verbal reasoning skills, while environmental factors might play a larger role in something like spatial abilities.
Interesting. And I imagine this also plays out differently across different academic subjects.
Absolutely. So, the way genes and environment influence your performance in math might be different from how they affect your reading comprehension, for instance.
So that's a really dynamic picture. It's not just one size fits all.
Not at all. And to make things even more complex, Pittrell and Wilkerson, they emphasize that these influences aren't static. They can change as a child develops.
Oh, so the balance can shift over time.
It can. So a child's genetic predisposition might be more prominent in early childhood, but then environmental factors become more influential as they get older and have more diverse experiences.
It's all starting to sound very complicated.
It is complicated, but it's also fascinating. And to add another layer of complexity, Pittrell and Wilkerson, they pointed out that children themselves aren't just passive recipients of their genetic inheritance or their environments.
What do you mean?
Well, they argued that children, especially in an educational context, they actively shape their own learning journeys.
So kids aren't just empty vessels waiting to be filled with knowledge. They're actively engaged in the process.
Exactly. They make choices, they pursue interests, they gravitate towards certain activities, and all of this is influenced in part by their genetic predispositions, but also by the opportunities and constraints of their environment.
So it's like this constant feedback loop between nature, nurture, and the child's own choices.
Precisely. And Petrel and Wilkerson, they specifically highlighted the importance of what they called non-additive contributions.
Non-additive contributions, what did that mean?
It means that the combined effect of genes and environment isn't just a simple sum of the two. You can't just add them together and get the complete picture.
Okay, so there's more to it than that.
They specifically looked at two key concepts: gene-environment correlations and gene-environment interactions.
Okay, break this out for me.
Sure. So gene-environment correlation, it basically means that your genes can actually influence the kinds of environments you seek out.
So a child who's genetically predisposed to be musically inclined might be more likely to join the school band or take piano lessons.
Exactly. And on the flip side, gene-environment interaction, it means that the environment can actually affect how your genes are expressed.
So two children with the same genetic predisposition might develop differently depending on the environment they're in.
Precisely. And all of this emphasizes the importance of creating diverse and enriched learning environments.
Why is that?
Because when you have a variety of learning experiences available, children are more likely to find the ones that really resonate with their individual strengths and inclinations, and that allows them to truly flourish.
So it's about giving kids choices and opportunities to explore different paths.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really inspiring example: the work of Jaime Escalante at Garfield High School, which was analyzed by William Lichten and Howard Weiner in this collection.
Oh, Escalante, I've heard of him. He was the math teacher who inspired those underprivileged students to excel in calculus, right?
He was. And Lichten and Weiner, they analyzed his success through this broader lens of the relationship between a student's initial aptitude and their ultimate achievement.
Because on paper, those students weren't supposed to succeed in advanced math, were they?
Many people doubted their potential, but Escalante, he saw something different. He created this incredibly supportive and stimulating learning environment.
So he was a really exceptional teacher.
He was. He had a real gift for presenting complex material in a way that was engaging, and he had this incredible ability to motivate his students.
And the results speak for themselves.
They do. And Lichten and Weiner, they pointed out that Escalante's success really highlights the crucial role of the teacher in creating that kind of enriched learning environment that Petrel and Wilkerson were talking about.
It's a great example of how the right teacher can really make all the difference.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit, another paper in this collection by Diane Halpern and Heather May focused on a different aspect of individual differences, cognitive abilities, and whether there are significant differences between males and females.
Ah, yes. Sex differences in intelligence. That's a topic that always seems to generate a lot of discussion and debate.
It does. And Halpern and May, they took a really thorough look at the research in this area.
And what did they find?
Well, they reported that while there don't seem to be significant overall differences in general intelligence between males and females, there are some interesting and consistent differences in specific cognitive abilities.
So it's not about one sex being smarter than the other, but rather about different patterns of cognitive strength.
Exactly. And they found that females, on average, tend to excel in tasks that involve verbal memory and the acquisition and use of verbal information.
So things like remembering lists of words or learning new languages.
Exactly. While males, on average, they tend to perform better on tests that measure visual spatial manipulation skills.
Like mentally rotating objects or navigating a maze.
Right, and also in advanced mathematical reasoning.
So there are these subtle but consistent differences in certain cognitive domains.
There are. And importantly, Halpern and May, they argued that these findings should inform how we approach education.
In what way?
Well, they emphasize the importance of recognizing and nurturing the unique potential of each individual student, regardless of their sex.
So instead of making generalizations based on gender, we should be focusing on individual strengths and needs.
Exactly. And this same caution against making broad generalizations, it was also central to the work of Robert Sternberg and Elena Grigorenko, who are also part of this collection.
Okay, tell me more about their work.
Well, they were really interested in the limitations of generalizing findings, from psychological research to educational policy.
I can see how that could be a problem.
Yeah.
You do a study in a lab with a very specific group of participants, and then you try to apply those findings to a much wider and more diverse population.
Exactly. And Sternberg and Grigorenko, they pointed out that many psychological studies are often based on quite narrow and unrepresentative samples.
Like college students who are often the most convenient participants to recruit.
Right. And they argued that these limited samples, they might not accurately reflect the full diversity of learners and learning environments that you find in the real world of education.
So trying to apply those findings to a classroom full of diverse students from different backgrounds with different learning styles, it could lead to some pretty misguided policies.
Absolutely. And they were particularly concerned about the misuse of intelligence tests in educational decision-making.
Because an IQ score is just one data point, it doesn't tell the whole story.
Exactly. And Sternberg and Grigorenko, they really emphasized the importance of valuing a wide range of talents and providing diverse educational settings to cater to those different talents.
So moving away from this one-size-fits-all approach to education.
Precisely. Now, another group of researchers in this collection, David Perkins, Sherry Tishman, Ron Richart, Kiki Donis, and El Andrade, they took a really interesting approach to understanding intelligence.
Oh, how so?
Well, they focused on studying intelligent behavior in everyday life outside of the traditional testing environment.
So not just looking at how people perform on IQ tests, but how they actually use their intelligence in real-world situations.
Exactly. And they introduced this really important concept, thinking dispositions.
Thinking dispositions, what are those?
Well, think of them as habits of mind or characteristic ways of approaching problems and information.
Okay, give me some examples.
Sure. So, for example, a thinking disposition might be being open-minded and willing to consider different perspectives, or being inclined to seek out evidence and reasons before forming an opinion.
So it's not just about being smart, it's about how you approach thinking itself.
Exactly. Other examples include being curious and actively seeking out new information, being strategic and planningful when solving problems, and being reflective about your own thinking process.
So someone might score very highly on an IQ test, but if they don't have these thinking dispositions, they might not actually behave very intelligently in real life.
That's the idea. And Perkins and his colleagues, they argued that these thinking dispositions, they're really crucial for intellectual success, maybe even more so than just raw intellectual ability.
It's like having a powerful engine but not knowing how to drive.
I like that analogy. And this has really important implications for education, because it suggests that we should be actively cultivating these thinking dispositions in students alongside traditional academic skills.
So teaching kids not just what to think, but how to think.
Precisely. Now, this collection also addressed the really important question of how intelligence relates to students with special educational needs.
Right, because intelligence testing has often been used to identify students who might need extra support or who might be gifted.
It has, and Barbara Louie and her colleagues, as well as Marianne Meyer, they really delved into this complex issue.
What were some of their key insights?
Well, they were particularly interested in whether intelligence, both as a theoretical concept and as measured by IQ tests, has special value for identifying and educating both talented and gifted students and students with learning disabilities.
So looking at both ends of the spectrum.
Exactly. And they reviewed a lot of the current practices used to identify these students, and they acknowledged that IQ tests can be helpful in this process, but they also highlighted their limitations.
Because an IQ score, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
It is. And they discussed how relying solely on IQ scores for identification can sometimes lead to overlooking students who might have exceptional talents that aren't captured by traditional tests.
Like a student who's brilliant at art or music, but maybe struggles with math.
Exactly. And they also talked about how IQ tests can sometimes be biased against students from certain cultural backgrounds.
Right, because those tests, they're often designed with a very specific cultural lens.
They are. And because of these limitations, Louie and her colleagues and Meyer, they also explored alternative IQ-free approaches to identifying and educating students with special needs.
So looking beyond just the test scores.
Exactly, focusing on other indicators of a student's potential or their learning challenges.
I think that's really important because every student is unique, and we need to make sure we're not using a single measure to define their abilities.
Absolutely. And finally, to bring this all together, Jessica Davis, she looked at how a fundamental theory of intelligence can actually serve as a foundation for designing educational programs.
So taking the theory and putting it into practice.
Exactly. And she really highlighted how your beliefs about intelligence, they directly shape the kinds of educational interventions you develop.
So for example, if you believe that intelligence is largely fixed, you might focus on identifying a student's strengths and weaknesses and then tailoring their education accordingly.
Right, but if you believe that intelligence is more malleable, that it can be developed through experience and effort, then you might focus on creating enriched learning environments that challenge students and help them grow.
So your underlying beliefs about intelligence really influence your whole approach to teaching and learning.
Absolutely. And this entire collection of articles, it really underscores the complex and multifaceted nature of intelligence and its crucial role in education.
It's been a fascinating journey through all these different perspectives.
It has. And for you, our listener, I hope this deep dive has given you a much richer and more nuanced understanding of what intelligence really means in the context of education.
It's clearly so much more than just an IQ score. It's this dynamic interplay of genetics, environment, individual differences, even emotions.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a really thought-provoking question for you to consider. Given all this complexity, what single change in our thinking or in our practices do you believe would have the biggest positive impact on education?
It's something to really ponder. And I hope this deep dive has given you the tools to start thinking about that question in new and insightful ways.
I hope so too.